The day my DNA kit blinked, match, 3 strangers started calling me sis. By month's end, one of them was asking if she could use my address. Just for a few letters, nothing big. People tell themselves a spit tube buys only ancestry trivia, but it also buys invitations. In the economy of identity, a high percentage match is like a VIP wristband. It gets people past your velvet rope before you've decided if there even is a party. You think you'll be curious and detached. Then a notification pings, and suddenly you're negotiating what counts as family with people who know your face shape better than your middle name. I lived in Columbus, worked student services at a community college, and believed in rules because rules had saved me from chaos more than once. 34, spreadsheet-brained, the kind of person who labels cords and keeps warranty folders. I ordered the kit during a winter sale to check on a few health markers and, fine, to see if the Irish rumor in our Benton line held water. Adoption wasn't part of my story. At least, that's what I'd always been told. My world was small on purpose. Class schedules, FAFSA reminders, a cat who respected boundaries better than most people. The result didn't feel like gossip. It felt like a system alert. Close family, parent/child. Then 2. Half-siblings. No names at first, just initials and ages. When they messaged, the tone was practiced soft. We've been looking a long time. We think we're connected through your father. There's a template for this moment, and it flatters the person who receives it. The capable one, the hinge. In every family constellation, there's an archetype who stabilizes the orbit. Administrators and oldest daughters are recruited for this role even when they didn't sign up. We met at a diner on Broad Street, neutral ground and coffee refills. They were charming in the way people are when they need something and aren't sure what they're allowed to ask. If you've ever worked a front desk, you know that look. Requests arrive dressed as emergencies to bypass your policy brain. We're between places, the older sister said, eyes shiny but steady. Just for a week, the younger added, like a refrain. I didn't offer a couch. I did offer a mailbox. It sounded minor, practical, a kindness with a lid. A couple pieces of mail, sure, I said, writing my address on a napkin the way you hand out a customer service email. Polite, removable, not quite personal. That was the decision I could live with, I told myself. That was the decision that would test how quickly a boundary becomes an entryway. The first envelope arrived with a handwritten return address from a clinic I didn't recognize. Then came a cable bill, then something from a bank. None of it was addressed to me, but each piece had my street name, my apartment number, my life's coordinates. It was strange. My mailbox had always been a tidy little archive of utilities, student loan statements, and catalogs I never ordered. Now it was a relay station for someone else's obligations. You learn quickly that mail is not neutral. Whoever receives it holds power. That's why breakups get ugly over who collects the packages. That's why landlords never ignore certified letters. By letting their envelopes land in my box, I wasn't just doing a favor. I was agreeing to play custodian of their proof of existence. At work, I watched students try to anchor themselves with paperwork, transcripts, immunization forms, IDs, proof that they belonged. People underestimate how much identity is stamped in triplicate. And suddenly, without asking, I was holding the triplicate for strangers. They treated it lightly, like it was just envelopes, but they stopped by often, almost every other day. Hey sis, anything for me? Always with that practice warmth. They made me the gatekeeper, and gatekeepers are never casual figures in anyone's story. I could feel the archetypal pressure, being cast as the reliable one, the one who steadies the situation. And when you're labeled that way, saying no feels like betrayal, not boundary. They weren't malicious. They were needy in a way that's harder to refuse because it looked so normal. A coffee, a chat, a quick pickup. They always lingered just long enough to suggest comfort, not intrusion. But their presence carried the weight of unfinished history. I told myself it was still harmless. A few letters, some polite conversation, nothing more. I could step out anytime. But anyone who's worked in systems knows, once you become a point of contact, you're no longer peripheral. You're central. And central figures don't get to vanish as easily as they think. It escalated in small increments, the way most boundary breaches do. First it was, "Can you sign for this package? I'm at work, and they won't leave it." Then, Mind if I keep a box here for a few days? My car's too small. What starts as convenience becomes dependency. And dependency, once invited, rarely retreats politely. I watched it happen, like I watch my students' semester schedules collapse. They come in with optimism, for classes, a job, maybe a kid, and by October, one dropped, one incomplete, a shift change that derails everything. My new siblings framed each ask like it was temporary, but you could see the pattern if you looked at the timeline. 1 week became 3. A single delivery turned into a steady stream. Their lives were bleeding into mine, not maliciously, but persistently. Psychologists would call it archetypal seepage. When people see you as the responsible one, they project their unmet needs onto you. You stop being an individual and start becoming infrastructure. It's flattering until it's exhausting. And maybe you've been there. Friends using your Netflix login, co-workers leaning on you for deadlines, neighbors borrowing tools that never return. Each moment small, but together a siphon. The younger one, Emily, texted late one night. "Could you hold onto a couple important docs for me? Don't want them lost at my place," she said place. But from the way she hesitated when describing it, I wasn't sure what kind of stability she had. A rented room? A couch? A friend's floor? I didn't ask. To ask is to invite a story, and stories come with obligations. I agreed, not because I wanted to, but because refusing would require declaring my limit out loud. And that's where people stumble. Naming the line feels more hostile than letting someone cross it. So I nodded, smiled, and cleared a drawer in my entryway. A drawer that used to hold spare batteries and take out menus now held their paperwork. A drawer that marked the shift from favor to responsibility. And with responsibility comes ownership, whether you asked for it or not. The drawer filled faster than I expected. Birth certificates, insurance papers, even a set of car keys in a plastic bag. They dropped them off casually, like I was a safety deposit box. "You're so organized," the older one, Rachel, said once, smiling as if she just complimented me on my hair. But that's how people disguise imposition. They wrap it as recognition of your strengths. I started noticing the ripple effects. My landlord asked about all the visitors. A neighbor down the hall gave me a look when she passed them in the stairwell. My cat, usually unbothered by company, hid under the bed after their visits stretched into half-hour conversations. My apartment had always been a controlled environment. Plants watered on schedule, groceries stocked just enough, noise low. Now the rhythm stuttered, like a song played out of sync. Archetypally, families always search for an anchor figure, someone who absorbs instability and radiates calm. In theory, it's noble. In practice, it's often exploitation dressed as trust. I could see how quickly Rachel and Emily had slotted me into that role. It wasn't about blood percentages, it was about function. I steadied, they leaned, and once the dynamic locks in, reversing it feels like breaking a contract you never signed. You probably felt it too. The coworker who always asked you to cover their shift because you're reliable. The friend who defaults to you as chauffeur because you don't mind driving. The flattery works only because it touches a truth. You are reliable, you do mind less. But what they don't see is the cost of being typecast. One afternoon, I came home to find Emily waiting by my door, holding a duffel bag. "Just until I figure things out," she said, before I even asked. It wasn't a question, it was a statement coded in hope. That's when I realized this wasn't about DNA anymore. This was about space, physical, emotional, and everything in between. And they were moving into mine without asking permission. I froze in the hallway, keys still in my hand. The duffel bag was a symbol more than luggage. Once someone's belongings cross your threshold, their presence follows. Emily's eyes were bright but tired, and her posture was the posture of someone who had already decided the answer was yes. That's the thing about need. It doesn't wait for permission. It assumes compliance. I unlocked the door, but instead of stepping aside, I leaned against the frame. "What's in the bag?" I asked, stalling for clarity. "Clothes," she said. "Just clothes." "I'll sleep on the floor. I won't be in the way." The language was textbook. Minimize the request. Promise invisibility. Suggest gratitude. Yet invisibility is the one thing you can't deliver when you bring your entire life into another space. I told her I needed time to think. The disappointment on her face wasn't sharp, it was rehearsed, like she'd worn it many times. That's when I understood the archetype she carried, the perennial dependent. Some people live in a pattern of leaning, always scanning for the next shoulder. It's not laziness, it's survival turned into habit. But survival habits don't consider the host's limits. They assume endurance. At work the next day, I couldn't focus. Students asked about deadlines, and I nodded absently, my mind circling Emily's bag. I thought about how easily a week becomes a season. I'd seen it with friends who let roommates crash temporarily. 6 months later, they were splitting rent, usually after countless awkward fights. The slope is never steep. It's gentle, almost invisible, until you've slid all the way down. That evening, I opened the drawer with their documents. It felt heavier now, as if paper itself had weight. Birth certificates, insurance cards, keys, proof that their lives were already anchored here, in my apartment, without me even noticing the shift. The bag at my door wasn't the first invasion. It was just the most visible one. And I realized, if I didn't draw the line now, there might not be a line left to draw. I asked Rachel to meet me for coffee, away from my apartment, away from the drawer and the duffel bag. She came in brisk, confident, the one who always did the talking. That in itself was telling. Families often produce a spokesperson, the negotiator archetype. They smooth over tension, present the collective as reasonable, and translate need into charm. Rachel had mastered it. "I'm worried," I told her, cutting straight in. "About the mail, the papers, the stuff in my place. It's too much." Her smile didn't falter. "We didn't mean to overwhelm you. We just thought it'd be safer with you." Notice the phrasing, not our decision, but our thought. As if responsibility were a shared conclusion, not an imposition. That's how subtle manipulation works. It recasts your compliance as collaboration. She assured me Emily's bag was temporary. "She's just in a rough patch. You're stable. You don't realize how rare that is." That line stuck. When people highlight your stability, it's both a compliment and a trap. You start to believe it's your duty to absorb instability around you. And maybe you felt that too, being called the rock, the responsible one. It flatters, but it also fixes you in place. I asked about their own support systems. Did they have friends, other relatives, options besides me? Rachel's answers were vague. Bridges burned, landlords strict, jobs unstable. Each explanation positioned them as victims of circumstance, never of choice. That's another archetypal pattern, the wandering dependents who accumulate no other option stories, and every time they retell it, the listener feels guilty for being their last resort. Walking home, I saw my building differently. The stairwell, the thin apartment walls, the landlord who noticed visitors. My life had always fit inside clear lines. Now those lines were blurred, and I wasn't sure if I could redraw them without tearing something important. When I opened the drawer again, I stared at their documents. Proof of identity, but also proof of dependency. It was dawning on me. I wasn't just their half-sister on paper. I'd been drafted as their infrastructure. And infrastructure, once built, is hard to dismantle. The next week, Emily showed up again. This time without the bag, but with a stack of unopened envelopes. She placed them on my kitchen counter, as if it were already hers. "Can you just keep these safe?" she asked, brushing crumbs into her palm like she'd lived there for months. It was the casualness that unsettled me most. Boundaries don't break with shouts. They erode with normalcy. I told her we needed to talk. "This isn't working," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "I can't be your storage. I can't be your mailing address. I can't." She cut me off with a quick, "We'll figure it out soon, I promise." Promises like that are currency for dependence. Cheap to make, costly to redeem. And if you've ever been in that position, you know the pattern. One vague assurance meant to buy more time, more space, more of you. At work, I found myself lecturing a student on deadlines with a sharpness that surprised me. It wasn't about his missing assignment. It was about my own life, my own inability to enforce limits. I told him, "If you don't name your line, people will assume it doesn't exist." He looked at me blankly, but I felt the true sting in my own throat. Archetypally, I was living out the tension between the guardian and the gatekeeper. The guardian protects, nurtures, steadies. The gatekeeper says who enters, who stays, who leaves. Most people can't hold both roles without burning out. And here I was, drafted into a family I'd never known, expected to play both simultaneously. That evening, I stacked all their documents and mail on the counter. For the first time, I felt angry, not at them exactly, but at the quiet theft of my space. They hadn't stolen objects, they'd stolen clarity. And clarity is the foundation of stability. When the knock came at the door, I didn't move right away, because I knew opening it meant more than letting them in. It meant confirming the role they'd already scripted for me. I finally opened the door, and there they were, both Rachel and Emily this time. Rachel carried grocery bags, like a peace offering. Emily looked nervous, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. They moved toward me with the ease of people who expected entry. I didn't step aside. Rachel smiled. "We thought we'd cook for you, as a thank you." It sounded generous, but gratitude offered in advance often masks negotiation. You don't cook a meal just to leave afterward. You cook a meal to stay, to settle, to stake a claim. Archetypally, it was the settler move. Bring resources, build comfort, create permanence. I recognized it instantly. "I can't have you here tonight," I said, my voice firmer than before. The surprise on their faces told me they hadn't expected resistance. That's another truth about boundaries. The longer you delay setting them, the more shocking they feel when you finally do. Rachel's expression hardened, just for a second, before she recovered with a soft, "We didn't realize it was such a big deal." Emily tried a different tactic. "We just want to be close. Isn't that what family does?" She leaned on the archetype of belonging, the most powerful lever of all. Everyone craves it. Everyone fears being the one to deny it. And I'll admit, a part of me flinched. Denying them felt like denying myself too, like rejecting the very bloodline I'd only just discovered. But here's the paradox. Sometimes belonging requires exclusion. To preserve who you are, you have to decide who doesn't get access. I looked at the bags of groceries, the hopeful faces, the documents still stacked on my counter behind me. Then I said, "Take your papers tonight. All of them." The silence stretched. Rachel blinked first, her jaw tight, but she nodded. Emily's eyes watered. They gathered the stack without argument. And as the door closed behind them, I felt the air shift in my apartment, lighter but unsettled, as if I'd cracked something fragile that couldn't be pieced back the same way. For the first time, I wondered, had I cut ties too soon, or not soon enough? The next few days were quiet, almost eerily so. No knocks at the door, no texts asking about mail, no envelopes wedged in my box that weren't mine. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I walked through my apartment noticing the spaces they'd occupied. The clear drawer was empty again, but it looked hollow, like it remembered. Even my cat roamed the place as if expecting company. At work, I caught myself analyzing my students differently. The ones who clung to advisors, who sought constant reassurance, I recognized the same pattern I'd just lived. Dependency isn't always dramatic. Often it's mundane, dressed up as everyday needs. But when you're the stable one, you become the stage they perform survival on. That realization made me more empathetic, but also sharper about where I drew lines. Stability, I realized, wasn't infinite. It was a resource, like money or time. And if you don't guard it, people will spend it for you. Rachel eventually called. Her voice was calm, almost professional. She said they'd found another place, that they didn't want me to worry. But there was an edge underneath, a subtle reminder, "We tried with you, and you didn't let us in." It wasn't spoken, but it was there, hanging in the silence after her words. Archetypally, that's the role of the outsider. When inclusion fails, they mark themselves as rejected, which in turn frames you as the one who excluded. You've probably felt that sting too, when someone paints your boundary as cruelty, when your no is reframed as betrayal. It's one of the hardest psychological traps, because it preys on our desire to be good, to be kind, to belong ourselves. That night, I replayed everything. The first message, the diner meeting, the envelopes, the drawer, the duffel bag. Each step had been small, but together they formed a staircase I hadn't noticed climbing until I was already at the top. And the view from up there was stark. Either I lived as their anchor, or I reclaimed my own ground. For the first time, I felt steady in the choice I'd made. Yet a part of me still wondered what I'd lost by saying no, not just them, but a version of myself that could have been. The sister, the bridge to a larger family. And once you glimpse that version, it doesn't vanish easily. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of my life returned. Bills with my name only, a cat sunning himself on the windowsill, neighbors nodding without side eyes about visitors. Normal felt like a relief, but also like a hollow echo. Because here's the truth, once you open the door to a different storyline, even briefly, you can't unknow it exists. I thought a lot about archetypes, the dependable sibling, the wandering dependents, the negotiator. They had tried to cast me as the anchor, the infrastructure they could build their chaos around. And I almost let them. Not because I wanted to, but because the role was familiar. Many of us slip into it without noticing. At work, in friendships, even in small favors that turn into unspoken contracts. We become steady because someone has to be. And then we forget we had a choice. By saying no, I didn't just protect my apartment. I reclaimed authorship of my role. I wasn't going to be the backdrop for their survival story. That didn't make them villains. It just made me unwilling to play the part they'd assigned. Boundaries always come with losses, the chance at connection, the easier narrative of instant family. But they also carve space for dignity, for clarity, for peace. Sometimes people think family is defined by DNA, by percentages on a chart. But living through it showed me something else. Family is defined by agreements. Who shows up, who respects limits, who builds trust instead of consuming it. And if you've ever been pulled into someone else's orbit, you know the cost of forgetting that. When Rachel sent one last text, "We'll leave you alone now," I didn't reply, not out of cruelty, but because silence can also be a boundary. I looked at the empty drawer one last time before filling it with batteries and menus again. My life fit neatly back into its frame. Different, yes. Clearer, absolutely. And that clarity was its own kind of belonging to myself.